Hi, I'm really happy to be here. I wish we could be doing this in person. I have only visited Turkey one time, and that was the beautiful historic site of Ephesus. I hope to return soon to see much more of this country's great history. Now, I want to begin with a confession. In my early years, my teenage years, I am fascinated by computers. These are primitive days. Computers lived in big air-conditioned rooms with operators on duty 24/7. We communicated with these computers with huge terminals where a dial-up connection meant literally dialing a rotary dial. Now, to prevent unauthorized use, these dials were secured with little locks. And one night, a sleepy grad student left his key in the lock. And here's my confession. I took it. I put the whole thing, lock and key, into my pocket. Why? Well, I imagined dialing up another university's computer room at 2 in the morning and sending hundreds of ring bell commands to wake up the operator, or better even, hundreds of paper feed commands. I imagined the operator being jolted awake and trying to frantically stop the avalanche of paper. Nerd humor, I guess. But when I went to use my prize, there was a problem. The lock was frozen. The key wouldn't turn or come out. So I went to a locksmith. He was a little old guy in a tiny shop. He took my lock, gave it a glance, reached in on his counter, grabbed a can of some stuff, gave it a quick spray, and suddenly the lock was fixed. The key came out. All was good. The locksmith would not take payment for fixing my lock, but he did offer to sell me a can of the stuff that he used, which I had never seen or even heard of before. How could I possibly say no? Here's the weird coincidence. 1 week later, I'm at a Formula One race outside Toronto, and what do I see in the pit garage next to one of these exotic race cars but a can of the exact same stuff that locksmith had sold me just days earlier. Now, you might be wondering what that magic spray was, but chances are at least some of you would guess that it was WD-40, because we know we can fix anything with two things. If it moves and it's not supposed to, we duct tape it. If it doesn't move and it's supposed to, we WD-40 it. Now, in the physical world, problems like frozen locks and squeaky hinges are relatively straightforward, easy to solve. In the business world that we all live in, problems can be a lot more complicated. Now, I have a quick request that is not complicated. If you would please take one finger and tap the back of your hand one time, just one little tap, that's all. We'll get back to that in a few minutes. Now, back to our business problems. Wouldn't it be great if there was a magic spray that would make our business problems go away as easily as that spray the locksmith sold me? Or better even, a loyalty spray that would reduce customer churn and employee turnover? Well, I have bad news. There is no magic spray like that. But, according to Nobel Prize winner Richard Thaler, the ideas that we'll be discussing here today will equip each of you with a mental can of WD-40. And this is based on how our brains work, on the science of human behavior, and in particular, the interplay between motivation and effort. As business people, motivation is our go-to tool. We motivate our salespeople with commissions, with contests. We motivate our customers with discounts, with bonuses. We motivate our employees with incentives and hopefully maybe a little bit of praise. Now, there's nothing wrong with motivation, but it shouldn't always be our first tool. Often these kinds of motivation are very expensive. Instead, today we're going to focus on effort, and in particular, unnecessary effort that I and others call friction. Often, it's friction that stops our customers, our employees, from accomplishing what we hope they would do. I want to paint for you today a picture of an organization with happy, loyal customers and happy, loyal employees. And I promise that you will leave this session with that mental can of WD-40, and not only that, with a mental pair of friction goggles. By the time we're done, you will be seeing friction that you didn't see before. I know that because I am turning on your brain's reticular activating system, RAS, to see friction. Your RAS is a filter that screens out everything that is not important in the particular moment. You can cross Times Square in New York City because your RAS filters out everything except oncoming cars, the crosswalk indicator, and the pedestrians right around you. You've had your own RAS experience if you've ever bought a new car or a new-to-you car that you thought was kind of unique, and within a week, you're seeing cars that look like yours everywhere. You're wondering, where did all those cars come from? They were there, but your RAS was filtering them out as part of the background noise. Now, it's saying, well, this might be important, and it's letting those cars through. So, on to equipping you with your mental can of WD-40 and mental pair of friction goggles. The last international conference I was able to attend before the pandemic shut down travel was on the lovely Dutch island of Texel, a beautiful hotel surrounded by sand dunes. Who knew there were sand dunes in Holland, right? And walking paths through these dunes. One of these paths had a little wood gate. It wasn't locked. It took very little effort to push open, but despite that, when I looked at the traffic flow, it appeared that most people had decided to walk around the gate rather than exerting the minimal effort to push it open. In fact, this phenomenon is so common, there's a name for it. When people find a better way of doing what you expected them to do, that's called a desire path. Did the people who designed this roundabout really think that people were going to actually walk around it instead of just straight across it? These behaviors are based on something called the law of least effort. According to Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, there is a law of least effort that applies to both cognitive and physical exertion. And he says that people will choose the least demanding path most of the time. And his colleague, Richard Thaler, won his prize pretty much for implementing this strategy in the real world. He found that you could get more people to save for retirement by making it just a little bit easier. Instead of filling out a form to opt into the retirement plan, you were automatically opted in, and you could fill out a little form to opt out. This seems like too simple a concept to justify the highest honor in economics, but this insight helped millions of people around the world save more money for retirement. Now, back to that silly little gate. It served no purpose at all, but it took a little bit of extra effort to push open or a little bit of extra effort to walk around it. In our customer experience, in our employee experience, we all have these pointless little blockers. This hotel, the gate looked like it had been there for years and years. They never bothered to remove it. We have these same kinds of blockers in our businesses, and we won't be high-performing organizations until we eliminate every unnecessary blocker like that. Now, not long after my marketing psychology book, Brainfluence, came out, I got invited to speak at a lot of conferences. At one of those conferences in San Francisco, one of my fellow keynoters took the stage wearing what looked like a purple bathrobe covered in symbols. This was a little odd even for San Francisco, but it turned out that he was BJ Fogg. He was wearing a magician's robe to make his talk a little bit more memorable. He is a pioneer in behavior design and a researcher at Stanford. He's famous for his Fogg behavior model that says you need 3 things to create or change a behavior. You've got to have motivation. The person has to want to do the behavior or want the result of doing the behavior. You've got to have a trigger, or as he now calls it, a prompt to get the ball rolling. And finally, you have to have ability. And that translates into not too difficult, not too much effort. His talk and my subsequent study of his work really led me to a much greater understanding of the interplay between motivation and effort. BJ himself says, don't focus so much on motivation. Instead, focus on making things easier. And going back to Richard Thaler again, he puts it very simply. If you want to encourage some activity, make it easy. Now, this has big implications for business. One business that I have been very loyal to for 10 to 15 years now is Amazon, and in particular their Prime delivery service. I know that if I choose most of their products, I will have it on my doorstep in 48 hours, 24 hours, or maybe even occasionally the same day. They make it very easy to do business with them. But a few years ago in my home state of Texas, they began charging 8% sales tax. At that time, not all e-commerce companies were charging that. So for me, it was an 8% price increase on buying from Amazon. I vowed to shop around. It would be stupid to pay an extra 8%, right? When I could buy from other e-commerce sites for less money. Well, when I look back a year later, my behavior had changed almost zero. Why? Because it was too easy to keep doing business with Amazon. In fact, Jeff Bezos himself says, when you reduce friction, make something easy, people do more of it. And that means placing a lot of orders. You know, as business people, often we don't see the friction that's there, or even if we do see it, we say, well, we can't do anything about it. We don't say anything. That can't be fixed. That's the way it has to be. It's best practice, or it would be very costly to change that. Let me give you an example that I'm sure you can identify with. For most of my life, I thought that taxis were a friction reducer, an effort saver, easier than taking public transportation, much easier than walking a long distance. And then you know what happened. Uber came along and showed us how much wasted effort there was in the entire taxi process, from waving by the side of the street to hail a taxi, to explaining to a driver, maybe who didn't speak your language very well, exactly where you wanted to go, to paying at the end and dealing with credit cards or currencies, calculating tips and so on. Uber eliminated all that friction. Now, if I have to take a conventional taxi, it seems like a pretty high friction experience to me. A more current example, something that we have all been doing too much of lately, and this is perhaps one example, is video conferencing, video calls. One brand emerged during the pandemic as the generic term for this process, and of course, that was Zoom. Suddenly, we were all on Zoom calls. We were wearing Zoom shirts. You know, and we think of Zoom as being a pandemic baby, that's what really caused them to take off. It certainly did help. But in the years leading up to the pandemic, they were already accelerating past much bigger competitors, much richer competitors, companies with much more technical talent, companies like Cisco, Microsoft, and Google. How did this little, relatively small startup do this? I think it's because of their mission statement. Best mission statement I've seen for any company ever, I think. And that is to make communications frictionless. This provides perfect clarity for every employee, for every web developer, compliance person, legal person. If they're going to make any change to the customer experience, they have to ask themselves, is this going to serve the company's mission, make things easier, or is it going to add friction? I tried to find a Cisco mission statement. I only found a rather old one, but it talked about shaping the future of the internet, creating unprecedented value, and customers, investors, ecosystem partners, whatever they are. Who knows what this even means? Does this provide any clarity to an app developer who is going to make a change to the user interface? Is he going to create unprecedented value or shape the future of the internet? Probably not. So this, to me, is a high friction mission statement. Now, I promised we'd talk about loyalty, and I want to first tell you about a big study done by the market research firm Gartner. They surveyed thousands and thousands of customer service interactions and asked people a variety of questions, including about the effort they experienced and some other behaviors. What they found was amazing. 96% of the customers who said they had a high effort experience said they would be disloyal to the brand. 96%. That's 10 times as high as those who said they had a low effort experience. Only 4% of the high effort customers said they would buy again, compared to 94% of the low effort customers. And today, we know how important word of mouth is. We want reviews, we want ratings, we want to know what other people think before we make a decision. 88% of the high effort customers said they would say bad things about the brand, compared to just 1% of the low effort customers. Let's recap these crazy numbers. For those customers who said they had a high effort experience, 94% said they would be disloyal, only 4% said they would buy again, and 88% said they would say bad things about the company. This is pretty scary, right? You know what's even more scary? This effort is in the customer's head. There's not an absolute standard for high or low effort that we can say, okay, well, now we're low effort. They aren't even comparing you to your direct competitors. They are comparing your experience to Amazon's, to Uber's, to Zoom's, whatever they think is low effort. And if you're making them work harder, you are providing a high effort experience. So I want you to reflect for just a moment. If you look at your customer experience now, can you honestly say that it's as seamless as Amazon's or the other brands I mentioned? If not, even if you have great products or great service, you're in danger of losing your customers. Now, it's important to look at every aspect of that experience, even the tiniest little things. Back in 1997, at a time when a lot of companies were trying to figure out what e-commerce was, Jeff Bezos was talking about frictionless shopping. The year later, they patented one-click ordering, and it was awarded 2 years later, 1999, long time ago. At the time, a lot of companies didn't think you could patent something that easy, that simple, that obvious, but they did, and they got the patent. Almost immediately, Barnes & Noble, their biggest competitor at the time, a bookseller, implemented a similar feature on their website. Pretty soon, they were in a big legal fight with Amazon. After years in court, millions of dollars in legal fees, Amazon prevailed. They won. What did they get for all that money, all that management time? Remember that one little tap? That is the level of effort that they imposed on their competition. That's it. Barnes & Noble added a confirm order click after their buy now click. That's all. It doesn't seem like it'd be worth millions of dollars, right? But there was one other smart company and person at the time. Steve Jobs and Apple were introducing their new music store. They saw one click, they wanted it. They could see the advantage it would provide. They didn't try and fight the patent. They didn't try and create a technical workaround. They paid Amazon $1 million so they too could have that tiny, tiny little advantage over their competitors. And if we fast forward to today, both Amazon and Apple are multi-trillion-dollar companies. Barnes & Noble isn't even a rounding error. So how do we go looking for friction in our processes? There are a lot of ways to evaluate your customer experience. You can observe customers. I recommend this. Observe real customers in the real world, how they use your products. You can do lab testing if you have that kind of facility. There are a lot of analytics tools out there, even free tools, that will let you see where customers are slowing down, where are they dropping out, where they're finding friction. You can use tools like click tracking and eye tracking, again, to see, are people focusing on what you want to do? Are they clicking on what they're supposed to be clicking on? You can use a tool like Net Promoter Score. I'm not a huge fan of it, but if you're not doing anything, at least Net Promoter Score will give you somewhat of a clue as to whether your customers like you or your brand. But what's most important, I think, is to measure the perception of effort. We talked about that. That effort is inside your customer's head. So you need to find out their opinion as to whether it's high effort or not. There's even a product called Customer Effort Score. You don't have to use that product. You can simply ask people how easy or difficult the experience was, but make this a very simple little thing, maybe 3 choices, 5 choices, and then a text box, non-mandatory, if somebody wants to add a comment about their experience. That's it. No complicated forms. This has to be easy in itself. So I think I've given you a little bit of food for thought there, but now I want to go down a little bit deeper into the friction rabbit hole and talk about employee experience and why that's important if you want to deliver a great customer experience. The last time I had management guru Tom Peters on my podcast, he emphasized again that your customers can never be happier than your employees. I'm not sure every manager believes this, but it is true. And that's kind of a problem. The latest Gallup data for the United States, published just a few months ago, showed that only 1 out of 3 employees is actively engaged with their work or their workplace. 1 out of 3, 2/3 aren't. They've at least partially checked out. And I thought that was pretty bad. And then I looked at the global statistics. Globally, it's 1 in 5. And Turkey, it's a little bit worse. Not quite, a little bit worse than 1 in 5. Not as bad as Italy, though, where it was 1 in 20. That stunned me. It's hard to imagine that they get anything done there. And the news isn't great, partially because of the pandemic and all the changes in business and consumers. Employee engagement actually dropped after rising for quite a long time last year. And you have to imagine that if your employees are not really engaged, if they're checked out of the business, they aren't going to provide the exceptional customer experience that you want. Now, let me tell you about Jack Welch, who was named the manager of the century for last century. He took over General Electric at a time when it had been prospering, but was now starting to run into major problems because of bureaucracy. The systems that had allowed it to grow in so many diverse businesses were now choking the business. So he did a few things. First, he eliminated layers and layers of management so that top managers were closer to frontline employees, closer to customers. And then, as a next step, he blew up the walls separating different functions so that a salesperson could talk directly to somebody in manufacturing without having to go through their boss and through all the channels. And one of the results of all this activity, and he of course turned it into the most profitable company in the world for a while. One of the things that they tried there was having workplace meetings where managers would sit down, even executives would sit down with hourly employees, union employees. Now, traditionally, management employees and union employees have not been on great terms. They're often treated as adversaries, but they tried to establish some communication. And one of the questions that an executive asked, which surprised perhaps everybody, was, how can we make your job easier? Not how can we make you more productive? How can we help you get more done? But how can we make your job easier? At first, the union guys thought this was maybe a trick question. They answered that it would come back to bite them somehow. But finally, one worker spoke up. He said, I work with sharp metal at my machine all day. I go through a pair of work gloves about once a week. When I need to get a new pair, I have to shut my machine off, leave my building, go to another building, go to the tool crib, fill out a form, requisition form, find a supervisor to sign it, go back to the tool crib, and finally get my gloves and come back to my building and my machine. Depending on whether there's a line at the tool crib and how difficult it is to find a manager to sign the requisition, that can take an hour, even 2 hours. And this happens once a week. Now, the solution was simple. They put a box of gloves by the guy's machine. That's all. And they eliminated that whole process. And this accomplished two things. First of all, it showed empathy. It showed that management understood what this worker was going through and actually wanted to make his job a little bit easier. Also, it showed trust. The reason that complicated procedure was there in the first place was at some point, a manager or maybe even a top executive said, well, our workers are going to steal gloves if we leave them out. So we'll have a procedure to make sure that nobody steals gloves, without even thinking about the cost of that procedure versus the cost of a pair of gloves. When they put the box there, they showed that employee and everybody else in that building, hey, we trust you. We're going to put these gloves here. It's going to make your life easier. And we trust that you aren't going to steal them. Let me talk a little bit more about trust. Paul Zak is the researcher that discovered that oxytocin is the hormone of human trust. Before the pandemic, at least, he was known for giving everybody he met a big hug, because hugs are one way to increase oxytocin levels in people's blood. Now, he and his team went into a variety of high-performing and not so high-performing companies, and they did thousands of surveys asking people, among other things, whether they were trusted by their boss, whether they trusted their coworkers, whether they trusted the company, and so on. And when they did then they did something else too. They took thousands of blood samples. When they got back to the lab and analyzed the data, they were really surprised. What they found was that the high-performing companies were high-trust companies. The highest performing companies not only had higher trust levels as indicated by the employee surveys, but the oxytocin levels in the bloodstream of the people working at those companies was higher. So when you can build trust, you can have a profound effect on the performance of your organization. And as you try and find these ways to build trust, to help people, I can tell you that your people have the answers. You don't necessarily need to hire a big consulting firm to figure out where the bottlenecks are. Your people know. Let me tell you about Bob Bethel. He's famous for saving 77 companies that were in deep trouble. He is the guy that the banks call when the company they loan money to looks like they won't be able to pay the loan back. Rather than let the loan become worth nothing, they force a sale of the company to Bob for $1. There's a catch though. If the company can't pay the note back, Bob has to. So, if you've ever seen turnaround specials, usually you might think, well, they're going to come into a company. The first thing they're going to do is have massive layoffs, cut costs, cut employees to reduce costs and overhead, and bring in their own management team, fire the top managers and bring in their own people so that they can trust and they know are competent. That is not Bob's approach at all. The first thing he does when he comes into a company that he's just bought for $1 is studies the financials, studies the operations, gets a feel for what's going on and where the problems are. But then he has an all-hands meeting, gets everybody in the company in a big room and explains truthfully the dire situation that the company is in. In many cases, the employees didn't even understand. The management never told them. They were never transparent about the company's problems. And then he empowers the people to fix these problems. He tells them, you know where the bottlenecks are in sales, where we're wasting money doing things, where we have processes that aren't necessary, where we can reduce costs, how we can get more sales with more customers. And he doesn't try and fix these problems himself. He lets the existing people do this. And amazingly, he has never had a mass layoff at companies that he's taken over. And in our conversation, he explained that in only a small number of cases has he ever even had to fire a manager because the person just wasn't able to get the job done. He knew that his people had the answers. It's just that the old management wasn't letting them solve the problems. Now, I'll give you an example of how this works in real life. Not too long ago, I was checking Wi-Fi speeds around my house, walking around trying to make sure I was optimizing my home network, and all the speeds seemed too low. And I realized that it was the speed from the internet provider that was part of the problem. Now, I had remembered upgrading my speed a few months earlier, but I did not recall exactly what the current speed was in my plan. So I did the logical thing. I jump on their website, log in, and check my plan details. Well, I could see my account details, like my payment information and past invoices and whatnot, but I could not find anywhere, even after 10 minutes of searching, what my contract speed was. So finally, I gave up and I called their customer service line. And after answering the questions like my grandmother's maiden name and what county I was born in to verify that I was indeed the account holder, even though I was already logged in on their website, I explain that, hey, I just need to know what speed I'm paying for in my plan. I tried to find it on the website and I can't. And this very nice representative says, sorry, you can't find that information online. We have to tell you. So I say, oh, okay, well then tell me, what's my speed? Sorry, we need your 4-digit security code. What 4-digit security code? I don't have a security code. Sorry, it's in the upper right corner of your invoice. What invoice? I don't have it. I don't even think we get invoices anymore, and I certainly don't have one. Sorry, you can download a PDF from the website. So wait, you're telling me that in order to find out the speed I'm paying for, I have to download a PDF, get a 4-digit security code? Yes. Sorry. Now, I know how to download a PDF. I did get my security code, and eventually she told me what my speed was. But this entire process was absolutely insane. And at the end of this process, finally, they say, we would welcome your feedback. They give me a feedback form and say, oh yes, I am going to tell these people exactly how bad, how ridiculous their processes are. And what do I find? There's nothing like a Net Promoter Score. Would you recommend our service to anybody else? Nothing about how effortful my experience was. Instead, was your representative courteous? Was your representative knowledgeable? And then they gave me 1,000 characters in a text box to say more stuff about the representative. They never asked anything about their service, the processes, or anything else. You know, I visualize the managers at that company, the executives, as suits sitting in their offices who don't want the answers to those questions. They don't want to know what their net promoter score is. They don't want to know if people like their processes. They want to keep things going and collect their next year-end bonus. The simple thing that you can do is ask a question like, what do our customers complain about? I guarantee you, if they would have asked that rep that I talked to, or any of the other hundreds of reps in that call center, what do customers complain about? One of the major things would have been having to get a 4-digit security code to find out what their speed is. But either nobody was asking or they were ignoring the answers. And then the other question you can ask is the one I already mentioned. How can we make your job easier? This will show not just the customer bottlenecks, but the internal, the employee experience bottlenecks, those procedures like the work gloves that waste their time that they know aren't really necessary. When you do this, you will have a motivated, engaged team. And you will probably encounter blockers, executives who say, no, well, it would take too much effort to fix that. It'd be expensive. That isn't really important. And what I encourage you to do when you encounter these people is to tell the one-click story, how one tiny little click was worth millions of dollars to both Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs, two of the smartest entrepreneurs and CEOs of this century. I encourage you to do a friction audit. And again, you don't have to hire a big consulting firm to do this. Start simply. Ask some of those questions that I talked about. Your people will point out where these bottlenecks are. And I also encourage you to go for the quick wins. Don't try and solve the biggest problems first. I mean, you work on them certainly, but when you start solving problems, even small ones, your people will see that you are really committed to the process. They will find more ways for you to reduce friction in your processes, both customer processes and employee processes. Now, I'm hoping that I've convinced you that it is just as important to focus on effort as on motivation. And I'm pretty sure I have. I know I've given you that mental pair of friction goggles. You will be seeing more friction than you were before. And you will leave with that mental can of WD-40. Now, I wish that we could connect in person after this event, but being virtual, we can't do that. So instead, I encourage you to connect on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm very easy to find. Just look for Roger Dooley and you'll undoubtedly find me. And I really appreciate the invitation. I wish you all luck. And again, I hope that someday I can meet with you in person. Thank you very much.